morbidity. Morbidity has been defined as any departure, subjective or objective, from from a state of physiological or psychological well-being. In practice, morbidity encompasses disease, injury, and disability. In addition, although for this lesson the term refers to the number of persons who are ill, it can also be used to describe the periods of illness that these persons experience or the duration of these illnesses. The underlying cause of death hardly provides the adequate picture of countless illness and other health problems that exist in any community. Because morbidity is less precisely recorded than mortality, such data are difficult to analyze, but they are nonetheless useful in program planning and evaluation. So these are the types of morbidity indicators. Dun sa previous lectures natin, we defined what is morbidity and what is mortality. So wala na pong malilito kung anong difference nilang dalawa ha. So number one, measures of disease frequency. Measures either in absolute or relative terms the magnitude of the disease in a given population. And then it answers the question, how big is the problem related to the disease or condition of interest? Next, measures of association. Quantifies the strength of the relationship between the disease or condition of the interest and corresponding exposure or risk factor being assessed. Lastly, it answers the question by how many more times are individuals who are exposed to a particular risk factor likely to develop or to have the disease or condition of interest compared to those who are unexposed. So, measures of disease frequency, what is the difference between incidence and prevalence? So, in a nutshell, ito lang ang difference ni incidence and prevalence. Meron lang tayo mga attributes on the left side para ma-differentiate natin kung ano ba talaga yung pinagkaiba nila. So, in the questions being answered for your incidence, how many people develop the disease? Si incidence, pagka merong new cases, ayan, merong mga bagong incident. Tama ba? Ano Tagalog ng incident? Mga bagong kaso, bagong incident. Parang, di ba, pag tinagalog mo si incidence, new case, parang ganun siya. Ganun yung katumbas niya. Pag prevalence naman, how many people have the disease? Kung sino yung may mga disease. Old and new cases, pasok po siya kay prevalence. Katulad ni incident, new cases, mga new cases ni COVID-19 around Barangay Silangan. Sa prevalence naman, how many people have the disease? Yung may mga old cases na, di ba? Old cases ng mga diabetes, ng malaria, ganyan. Old and new, magkasama na po sa prevalence. And then, next attribute, events in the numerator, number of new cases of a disease. Yun yung numerator natin for incidence. Next naman, kay prevalence, number of existing old and new cases. Prevalence po yan, fall under prevalence. Next, types of disease. Kapag incidence, acute, meaning short duration, or yung sudden, biglaan, acute, short lang. And then, pag prevalence, yung chronic na, ito yung mga continual na, recurring, yan, mga matatagal na. Yun yung pinagkaiba, di ba? Si acute tsaka si chronic. Alam na po yung difference nun. Next attribute, usual area of application, disease etiology or causation. Kapag gusto mong malaman kung ano yung cause ng disease nung biglaang new case, biglang nagkaroon ng insidente, ang gagamitin mo si incident. Causation, you want to know the cause. And then for prevalence, in service delivery na, in long term na po siya. So these are the two types of incidence measures, incidence proportion or cumulative incidence. Usually fixed population siya, not usually fixed, in a fixed population siya. So, di ba dito sa mga biostatistics and epidemiology natin, gumagawa tayo ng mga studies. Ayan, ito yun, sa fixed population ginagawa yung study. It is the proportion of disease-free individuals who contract the disease within a specified period of time and then is calculated by this. In incidence proportion, ito yung pinaka-formula natin. So, for example, a cohort of 70 healthy individuals whose observation started at the same time was observed for the occurrence of an event for 7 months. And then, is equals to, I think there's something wrong with the formula, with the given. I'll check the given kasi, pero ang dapat na naka-input dito is 3 over 7 times 100. I'll double check this one. And then, 3 divided by 7 times your factor 100, magiging 42.8 divided by 100% at risk. So, since persons ang pinag-uusapan natin, hindi po pwede yung 42.8. Wala namang 42.8 na tao, di ba? Parang may kalahating tao ba? So, i-round up natin siya to 43. 43 new cases per 100 population developed the disease during the period of time. During the period of follow-up. Next, kung si incidence proportion sa fixed population siya, sa study ng fixed population, si incidence rate naman or incidence density, it measures the rate at which new cases occur. However, it answers the question how fast the disease occur and deals with the dynamic population. So subjects have varied exposure periods and as such uses total person time as indicator. Kung si incidence proportion, fixed lang yung population sa isang study, sa isang cohort, kayo lang 7 for 7 months, kayong 7 lang, ganyan. Ito naman, iba't ibang number ng population mo, dynamic na siya, so iba-iba. And then, hindi siya nakakulong lang sa isang study. Hindi sila parang naka-PBB house, parang ganun. Nasa isang open area, meron sila iba't ibang exposure, tsaka sila tinitest. And then, ito po yung formula natin. For incidence rate, number of new cases that develop during the period divided by number of person time at risk times your factor. And then, incidence rate, number of new cases that develop during the period divided by average population times duration of follow-up times your factor. Next, last, for your prevalence measures, number of existing cases of a specified disease divided by number of persons examined times your factor. So, prevalence measures the proportion of existing cases of a disease on the population at a particular point in time, and it measures the residuals or your survivors of an illness. Kasi nga, di ba, yung mga chronic diseases natin, yun yung mga minimeasure ni prevalence. And then, it is very useful in describing the magnitude of chronic conditions existing in a population at a point in time. So, you have to take note that prevalence measures does not measure the risk of developing the disease. So, here are my additional notes that would be very helpful sa period 1 examination nyo. Hindi ko na siya i-discuss isa-isa. Basahin nyo na lang po maigi. So, that's it. Good day. This is a video recording of your measures of disease frequency, naming your incidence and prevalence. I know we're done with your period 1, sessions 1 to 8. But this is just a quick review, or I'll give some examples of your disease frequency. For those na medyo naririto pa sa mga concepts natin and principles of measures of morbidity, don't worry, I'll give a few examples for you to be able to grasp the knowledge and apply it on a real problem solving. Just to give you a quick recap of your measures of disease frequency, incidence, and prevalence, incidence answers the questions how many people develop the disease or yung mga bagong kaso mo, mga insidente, bagong kaso. It will all fall under the incidence. Meanwhile, for your prevalence, how many people have the disease, naming the old and new cases. Again, incidence, mga bagong kaso. Prevalence, if you're going to talk about the old and new cases. And then, events in the numerator of your incidence is the number of new cases of a disease. It will fall under the incidence. Ito yung mga pang-numerator mo. Meanwhile, for the prevalence, ang numerator natin yung mga number of existing old and new cases. And then the types of diseases determined in your incidence are the ones that are acute. And then for your prevalence, the ones that are chronic naman. Kasi nga, kaya siya chronic kasi yung mga old na, di ba? Yung mga old and new cases na determine sa prevalence. So, yung mga chronic diseases mo will fall under the prevalence kasi old, chronic, prevalence are very synonymous. Next, the usual area of application for your incidence is the disease etiology or the causation. If you want to know what causes the disease, and then you will get the incidence rate. Meanwhile, if you want to improve your service delivery, you have to get the prevalence rate of a certain community. Okay? The difference for the usual application is in knowing the causation or the what causes the disease will fall under the incidence. And then in improving the service delivery, you have to get the prevalence rate of a community. In your incidence rate, we have two types of incidence measures, naming Number one, the incidence proportion or your cumulative incidence. Incidence proportion or cumulative incidence has a fixed population. Again, it has a fixed population. It is the proportion of disease-free individuals who contract the disease within a specified period of time. It is calculated by incidence proportion is equals to number of new cases that develop during the period divided by population at risk developing the disease during the period times your factor 100. Okay, ito yung example natin na nabigay ko na last time. And then the interpretation, do not forget. Another example is in a mass screening of 1,350 65-year-old men, 130 were found to have a certain disease. During the following 1-year period, another 210 contracted this disease. So, kung i-apply lang natin yung formula natin na number of new cases developed during the period, so ano ba yon? Yung 130 or yung 210? Yung 130 kasi yun yung nag-develop during the certain period of time divided by yung 1,350 which is yung population at risk mo develop the disease during the period times yung 100 lang. Since minultiply natin siya by 100, we will convert it into a percentage. Bakit hindi kasama yung 210? Kasi during na siya nung 1-year period na following year na siya. So, kung ang pinag-uusapan lang natin is yung 1,000 in a mass screening ng 1,350 ng 65-year-old men, 130 lang yung magiging numerator natin. Hindi pa kasama si 210. So, na-disregard siya. Okay? Another type of your incidence measure, still under the incidence rate, is the incidence rate or incidence density. So, we're done with the incidence proportion. We're now moving forward to your incidence rate or incidence density. It measures the rate at which new cases occur, answers the question how fast the disease occur, and also it deals with a dynamic population. So, if you're given a set of data na problem solving in a paragraph form, i-identify mo muna if yung binigay sa yung population is a dynamic one or it is a fixed population. Kasi kung dun pa lang sa population, dun pa lang sa understanding mo ng population, hindi na tama, nagkamali ka na, and then all next steps will be wrong. Yung magiging mali ka na kasi pagpili pa lang nung incidence measure mo, nung measurement mo, magkakamali ka na. So, yung mga next step doon, magkakamali ka na. So, pag-identify pa lang ng population, kung dynamic or fixed siya, dapat magaling ka nang mag-identify. Okay? Incidence rate deals with a dynamic population. Subjects have varied exposure, meaning dynamic population, meron silang iba't ibang exposure period, and such uses total person time as its denominator. What is a person time? Person time, a function of the size of the population followed up and the duration of the follow-up time. We have two examples on getting your incidence rate. We have two types. We have two examples. First example is this one. Ito yung formula niya. Incidence rate is equals to number of new cases that develop during the period divided by number of person minus time at risk, and then multiply by the factor. Another type of getting your incidence rate is equals to number of new cases that develop during the period divided by average population times the duration of follow-up times the factor. So, if you're going to apply it in a problem solving, ito yung magiging kalalabasan niya. For example, ang steps natin in getting your incidence rate, number 1, take the number of new instances. Take the number of new instances of the event in question. Sino ba yung mga nakakuha ng disease, ng illness, ng accident? Sino ba yung nagkaroon ng financial event during a specified period of time? Yun yung first step natin. Second step natin is to divide by the total population at risk. Total population at risk during that period of time. And then lastly, multiply mo siya sa factor. And again, and again, the factor depends on the magnitude of the population. Okay, kapag ka ang population mo nasa 500,000, most likely ang factor natin 100,000. Ang population mo nasa 300, 500 girls, 600 mothers. So, ang factor natin most likely ay 100. Nasa hundreds lang. Okay? This is an example. US with a population of 500,000 may have had 20 new cases of tuberculosis in 2013. This translates to an incidence rate of 4 cases per 100,000 person. Paano po nakuha yung 4 cases per 100,000 persons? Kasi in-apply natin yung incidence rate na formula natin. Incidence rate, total number of new cases of a specific disease during a given time period divided by total population at risk during the same time period. So, yung mga nagkaroon daw ng cases, 20, ito yung numerator, divided by ang population, 500,000, times anong factor? Bakit po naging 100,000 yung considering factor natin dito? Kasi po, ang population, total population natin is 500,000. So, nag-decide tayo na ang gagamitin nating factor ay 100,000. So, i-apply lang natin 20 divided by 500,000 times 100,000. The result is 4 cases. And then, if you're going to put it in an interpretation, US had 4 cases of TB per 100,000 population per year. Okay? Tama ba? Tama po. Next. Another way of getting your incidence rate is ito naman, yung number of new cases that develop during the period divided by the average population times the duration of follow-up. Kasi hindi naman lahat ng incidence rate same ng pagkakakonstruct ng problem. What if bigyan ka ng ganitong type of problem? During a 5-year period, there were 521 injuries due to incidents among the personnel at certain medical laboratories. The number of employees in these laboratories was 540 at the beginning of the period and 610 at the end. So again, basahin ulit natin yung problem. So para mas maintindihan natin yung problem, babasahin natin siya ng mga 4 na beses. 'Di ba? Para mas mag-gets talaga natin, and then isusulat natin yung mga binigay na given. So tinuruan na tayo niyan sa basic math natin, sulat mo yung given. And then, after writing the given, isa-substitute mo na siya dun sa formula na binigay sa'yo or yung substitute yung formula na alam mo. Okay? During a 5-year period, there were 521 injuries due to incidents among the personnel at certain medical laboratories. The number of employees in these laboratories was 540 at the beginning of the period and 610 at the end. So, number of new cases that developed during the period, ilan nga ba? 521 will be our numerator. Divided by, ang sabi daw, average population. Average population. Ilan ba yung population? So, average, getting the mean. Diba? So, kung kukunin mo yung average nila, i-add mo yung ilan ba yung population na na-observe mo? 540. And then, 610. The number of employees in these laboratories was 540 at the beginning of the period and naging 610 na sa dulo. So, add mo lang yung population mo, 540 plus 610 divided by 2, yun na yung average mo, times duration daw nung follow-up mo. Ilan ba? Ilan ba yung duration nung follow-up mo? 5-year period. So, ito na siya. Apply mo lang times 5. And then, our factor is 100 kasi tinan mo naman yung magnitude mo nasa hundreds lang. So 100. And then 521 divided by the average nito times 5 and then multiply mo lang sa 100 na factor mo. The result will be 18.12 per 100 period. Again, pagka binigyan ka ng population na dalawa, kukunin mo lang yung average niya. And then same goes pag binigyan ka pa ng isa pang population, kunin mo lang yung average nung tatlong population. And then multiply mo lang sa duration ng follow-up. Okay? Clear po ba tayo doon? We're done with incidence rate and then your incidence proportion. Prevalence measures naman tayo. Prevalence measures, ang formula natin dito is number of existing cases of a specified disease divided by number of persons examined times the factor. Again, the factor depends on the magnitude ng population mo. Prevalence measures the proportion of existing cases of a disease on the population at a particular point in time. And then it measures the residuals. Examples, yung mga survivors of a certain illness or a certain disease. Also, it is useful in describing the magnitude of chronic conditions existing in a population at a point in time. And lastly, it does not measure the risk of developing the disease. And then the formula for your prevalence rate is all new and pre-existing cases of a specific disease during a given time period divided by total population during the same time period times the factor. Okay, during the 1980, the Framingham Head Study examined 2,477 subjects for cataracts and found that 310 alongside with 500 new cases. So, to solve this prevalence rate, meron ka ng 310, kasi nga daw, all new and pre-existing cases, di ba? 310. Nung tinest daw yung 2,477 subjects for cataract, meron daw siyang na-found out na 310 alongside yung mga, meron daw 310 pre-existing cases alongside yung mga na-test na bagong 500 new cases. Okay? Add mo lang silang dalawa. Kasi nga all new and pre-existing 310 plus 500 divided by total population which is 2,477 times, bakit 1,000 po yung naging factor? Bakit po 1,000? Kasi po nasa thousands ang ating population. Nasa thousands ang ating population. And then is equals to 327 per 1,000. And then interpret mo na lang, gawa mo na lang siya ng sentence. Ang key sa pagpa-problem solving natin sa ating mga morbidity measures is to read the problem twice, thrice, or 4 times. And then, dapat tama yung pagsasubstitute mo, tama yung intindi mo kung ilan yung pre-existing cases, ilan yung all new cases, para tama siya kapag sinubstitute mo na sa given formula. Kasi hindi porkit kabisado mo yung formula, tama na yung substitution mo. Diba? Kahit hindi mo kabisado yung formula, intindi mo on how to, naiintindihan mo kung paano kuhanin ng prevalence rate, masasubstitute mo siya ng tama. Okay po ba tayo doon? And then, what is a relative risk? The relative risk, also called the risk ratio of something happening, is where you compare the odds for two groups against each other. Again, a relative risk, or what you call the risk ratio of something happening, is where you compare the odds for two groups against each other. And then the formula for relative risk is this one. And then pinagsama na natin si relative risk and attributable risk. Pag binigyan ka ng table ng incidence with the yes and the no, the factors are exposed group and non-exposed group, you will label it them with A, naming the exposed group with the yes, and then incidence ng no, ng exposed is B, and then if you're going to total it, A plus B, and then yung non-exposed group mo naman na yes, and then the no with that has not the disease, C and D yan ng non-exposed group mo. A, B, C, and D. And then kapag i-apply na natin siya sa relative risk na formula, sa substitute na natin siya. The formula again is incidence risk among an exposed group. Ito yun. Divided by incidence risk among the non-exposed group. Ito naman yun. Ito lang siya. Exposed group yung A, yung total number of exposed yung A and B mo. Di ba po? So, kung bibigyan tayo, babatuhan tayo ng example, A divided by yung total. Kung ano yung nandito, kunin mo, A, substitute, and then yung total, substitute, divided by, kunin mo naman yung incidence risk among non-exposed, yung C, divided by C plus D. So, kunin mo muna yung solution, solve mo muna to, and then solve mo muna to, and then the result will be your relative risk. Medyo magulo lang siyang tingnan dito, pero basically, ganito lang siya. A divided by A plus B divided by C plus C plus D. Basta tama yung pagkaka-label mo sa kanya, nasa table pa lang. Mas madali na siyang kuhanin. And then, meanwhile, for your attributable risk, pag meron ka na ng exposed and non-exposed group, incidence risk among an exposed group minus incidence risk among non-exposed group. So, ito lang siya. Nung nakuha mo na yung exposed group mo, minus mo na siya dun sa non-exposed group mo. Diba? Basta tama yung pagkaka-label mo dun sa table, minus mo lang siya. And then, pag tinatanong sa attributable risk, ay ano mo lang siya, multiply mo lang sa factor na 100. And then, if minultiply mo sa factor na 100, you'll be able to get the result of a percentage. And then, do an interpretation of it. Okay? Attributable risk, incidence risk among an exposed group minus exposed minus unexposed equals to times the factor and then percentage yung pinaka-final result. Okay, that ends our quick review of your morbidity measures for today. Again, if you have questions and clarifications or you need assistance too, do not hesitate to send me a PM. Thank you and God bless.